What if one of the most unsettling films ever made wasn't just confusing on screen, but even more disturbing behind the scenes? When people talk about Donnie Darko, they usually dive into its labyrinth of time loops, existential dread, and that haunting sense that reality itself might be fractured. It's the kind of psychological cinema that doesn't just tell a story. It pulls you into a state of unease, where every frame feels like a clue or a warning. But here's the thing most viewers don't realize. The chaos, the ambiguity, the almost surreal tension that defines the film didn't just come from the script. It bled into the production itself. This wasn't a polished Hollywood machine operating with clarity and confidence. This was a low-budget project driven by a young, relatively unknown director, Richard Kelly, who was trying to translate an incredibly complex vision into something that barely anyone around him fully understood. Imagine being on set, delivering lines that hint at parallel universes, manipulated timelines, and philosophical paradoxes without having the full picture. That was the reality for much of the cast. And yet, somehow, that uncertainty became part of the film's DNA. Actors like Jake Gyllenhaal weren't just performing confusion, they were living it. The emotional instability you see on screen? In many ways, it mirrors the experience behind the camera. Scenes were shot under tight constraints, with limited resources, and often with a lingering question in the air. What exactly are we making here? Was it science fiction? A psychological thriller? A metaphysical puzzle? Or something that didn't quite fit into any category at all? That ambiguity wasn't just artistic, it was real. And it created a strange kind of energy on set, one that blurred the line between performance and genuine disorientation. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Some elements that would later become iconic, the eerie tone, the unsettling pacing, even the emotional disconnection between characters, weren't entirely planned in the way you might expect. They emerged from limitations, from uncertainty, from moments where things didn't go as intended. And instead of correcting those flaws, the film absorbed them, turning imperfection into atmosphere. It's almost as if the film was evolving on its own terms. And maybe that's why Donnie Darko feels the way it does. Not clean, not resolved, but alive in a deeply unsettling way. Because when a production itself starts to mirror the themes of its story, when confusion, tension, and unpredictability seep into the creative process, you don't just get a movie. You get something closer to an experience, something that lingers. But the real story of what happened during those filming days, the casting decisions that nearly derailed everything, the strange coincidences, and the moments that left even the cast uneasy, those are the pieces that begin to reveal just how unusual this production truly was. And maybe, as you're listening to this, something about it feels strangely familiar. That sense that you're watching something unfold without fully understanding it, that quiet tension in the background, that feeling that there's more beneath the surface than what's being shown. If that kind of psychological depth pulls you in, if you're the type of person who enjoys decoding hidden meanings, exploring film theory, and diving into the darker layers of cinema, then take a second to engage with this video. A simple like helps this story reach more people who are just as fascinated by these unsettling narratives. And I'm genuinely curious. Have you ever watched a film that left you feeling disturbed in a way you couldn't explain? Something that stayed with you, almost like it was trying to tell you something? Comment below and share that experience, because those are the kinds of films we explore deeply here. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing, not just to follow along, but to be part of a space where cinema isn't just watched, it's dissected, felt, and sometimes even questioned. Because what we're about to uncover goes far beyond trivia or behind-the-scenes facts. It starts to blur into something much more unsettling. So before Donnie Darko became this cult, mind-bending piece of psychological cinema that people obsess over, decode, and revisit like a puzzle that never fully resolves, it was, quite simply, a failure. Not the romantic kind we talk about after the fact, the kind that feels poetic in hindsight, but a very real, very uncomfortable kind of failure that almost erased the film before it ever had a chance to exist in people's minds. The timing couldn't have been worse. The film was released just weeks after one of the most traumatic moments in modern history, and suddenly its imagery, especially the plane engine falling from the sky, hit audiences in a way that felt too close, too raw, almost inappropriate. Studios didn't know how to position it. Marketing didn't know how to sell it. Was it a sci-fi thriller? A psychological drama? A coming-of-age story wrapped in existential dread? It didn't fit cleanly into any box, and in Hollywood, that's usually a death sentence. And then there was the budget, or the lack of it. This wasn't a production backed by massive resources or studio confidence. It was fragile, uncertain, constantly on the edge. Richard Kelly was just 26 years old, carrying a story that was dense with time travel theory, alternate realities, and philosophical undertones most seasoned filmmakers would hesitate to touch. Imagine trying to convince a crew, a cast, and investors that this complex narrative, filled with symbolism, nonlinear storytelling, and emotional fragmentation, would actually land with an audience. Most people didn't believe it would. And you can feel that tension if you look closely, not just in the story, but in the way the film exists. There's something almost unstable about it, like it shouldn't have come together, like at any moment it could collapse under its own weight. That feeling didn't come from nowhere. It was built into the process. Scenes were shot quickly, sometimes without the luxury of multiple takes, with creative decisions being made under pressure rather than precision. There's a kind of rawness that comes from that, a lack of polish that, instead of weakening the film, gives it this haunting authenticity. It feels less like something manufactured and more like something discovered or even stumbled upon. And when the film finally hit theaters, almost no one showed up. It disappeared quietly. No big reactions, no immediate impact, just silence, which is strange when you think about it. Because how does something so layered, so rich in film theory, symbolism, and psychological depth just vanish? How does a story that feels this intentional, this loaded with meaning, fail to connect at first glance? Unless the problem wasn't the film. Unless it was something else entirely. Something about the moment, the people, the expectations, or even the way the story was meant to be experienced in the first place. And this is where things start to shift. Because once you look past the failure, past the confusion, past the sense that everything was falling apart, you begin to notice that some of the most important elements of the film didn't come from control at all. They came from unpredictability, from choices that didn't make sense at the time, from decisions that, honestly, could have gone very wrong. If this part made you feel like the film was almost never supposed to exist, drop a comment with the word paradox, because what comes next only makes that feeling stronger. And if you're starting to see Donnie Darko in a completely different light, a simple like helps push this kind of deep dive storytelling to more people who crave psychological cinema and hidden meanings. And once you accept that the film was already balancing on the edge of collapse, the next layer becomes even more unsettling, because inside that fragile production, the choices being made weren't just risky, they were almost irrational. Take the casting, for example. At the time, Jake Gyllenhaal wasn't the obvious, safe choice you might expect for a film carrying this much psychological weight. He wasn't a proven box office anchor, and this kind of role, fragmented, introspective, emotionally unstable, could easily fall flat in the wrong hands. But here's the strange part. Instead of bringing clarity, his presence seemed to deepen the ambiguity. His performance doesn't guide you, it pulls you further into uncertainty. And that wasn't just acting, it reflected something very real about the environment he was working in. Because on set, clarity was a luxury no one really had. The script itself was dense, layered with time travel logic, alternate timelines, and philosophical subtext that wasn't fully explained even to the people bringing it to life. Actors weren't given neat answers. There wasn't a clear roadmap. They had to feel their way through scenes that didn't always make sense in isolation, trusting that somehow, when everything came together, it would form something coherent. That kind of process creates a very specific emotional state, one where doubt, curiosity, and even discomfort start to bleed into the performance. And then there's the dynamic between Jake and Maggie Gyllenhaal. On paper, casting real-life siblings might seem like a simple decision, even a practical one. But in a film so rooted in psychological tension and subtle emotional exchanges, that real connection adds an unpredictable layer. Their interactions feel natural, almost too real at times, like you're watching something unfold that wasn't entirely scripted. There's an ease, but also an edge, a sense that the line between character and person is slightly blurred. Now add to that the presence of Frank. That figure, the grotesque, human-sized rabbit, wasn't just unsettling for the audience. On set, it created a genuine sense of unease. The costume itself was physically uncomfortable, restrictive, and visually disturbing in a way that didn't fade with repetition. Imagine trying to deliver an emotionally grounded performance while facing something that triggers a primal discomfort every time it enters the frame. That tension doesn't disappear. It builds. It lingers. And eventually, it becomes part of the film's texture. What's fascinating is that many of these elements, the confusion, the discomfort, the unpredictability, weren't polished out. They were absorbed. Instead of smoothing the edges, the film leaned into them. It allowed imperfections to shape its identity. And that's where something deeper starts to emerge. Because when a film stops trying to control every variable, it opens the door for something else to take over. Something less predictable. Something harder to define. And maybe that's why Donnie Darko feels the way it does. Not like a perfectly constructed narrative, but like a living system. One where every strange decision, every moment of uncertainty, every uncomfortable silence contributes to a larger, almost intangible effect. You're not just watching a story unfold, you're experiencing a kind of psychological atmosphere that doesn't fully belong to the screen. But here's where it takes an even stranger turn. Because some of the most defining aspects of the film, the tone, the pacing, the emotional disconnection, weren't originally intended to carry the weight they ended up carrying. They evolved, quietly, almost accidentally, as if the film itself was adapting in real time, responding to the very chaos that surrounded it. And if you've ever been part of something that didn't make sense while it was happening, but somehow revealed its meaning later, comment the word synchronicity. Because what happened after the cameras stopped rolling is where this story stops being just about filmmaking and starts feeling like something else entirely. And when the cameras finally stopped rolling, you might expect a sense of relief, a feeling that, despite the chaos, something had been completed. But with Donnie Darko, what came next felt less like an ending and more like a disappearance. There was no explosion of recognition, no immediate wave of analysis or cultural impact. The film entered theaters quietly and left even quieter. Audiences didn't show up. Critics were divided, confused, unsure of what they had just seen. Some recognized fragments of brilliance. Others saw only incoherence. It didn't fit the cinematic language people were used to decoding. It demanded patience, interpretation, a kind of psychological participation that most viewers weren't prepared to give at the time. And then it was gone. But this is where the story shifts into something almost paradoxical. Because instead of dying, the film began to circulate in a different way. Through DVDs, late-night viewings, whispered recommendations. It started to spread, not as a mainstream success, but as a kind of underground signal. People would watch it alone or with a small group, and then immediately feel the need to talk about it, to question it, to understand it. And when they couldn't fully understand it, they watched it again and again. What followed was something rare, especially for that time. The birth of a collective decoding. Early internet forums became filled with discussions trying to piece together the film's timeline, its philosophy, its hidden structure. Viewers weren't just consuming the story, they were collaborating with it, building theories around time loops, tangent universes, manipulated dead, and existential determinism. The film had transformed from a failed release into an interactive psychological experience, almost like it needed time to find the right minds. And then there's the emotional anchor that quietly amplifies everything: Mad World. That final sequence doesn't just close the film, it imprints it. The tone, the melancholy, the sense of something unresolved yet deeply felt, it lingers. It reframes everything that came before it. Suddenly, the confusion isn't just intellectual, it becomes emotional, personal. And that's when the film stops being something you analyze and starts becoming something you carry. Even Richard Kelly eventually stepped in to offer explanations, releasing extended material, clarifying elements of the narrative. But interestingly, the more he explained, the less definitive the film felt. Because part of what made Donnie Darko resonate wasn't clarity, it was the space it left open, the gaps, the ambiguity. The feeling that no matter how much you understand, there's always something just out of reach. And maybe that's the real reason it endured. Not because it was perfectly executed, not because it was immediately understood, but because it wasn't. Because it arrived at the wrong time, in the wrong way, and then waited, quietly, until the world caught up to it. So if this story made you see the film not as a failure, but as something that unfolded exactly the way it needed to, drop a comment with the word destiny. And if you felt that shift, that moment where confusion turns into fascination, leave a like, because that's exactly the kind of cinematic experience we explore here. And if you want to keep diving into films that feel less like entertainment and more like psychological journeys, consider subscribing, because there are stories out there that don't just live on the screen, they follow you long after it fades to black.